In Last Epoch, standing still is really bad. It's actually really bad in a lot of ARPGs, not just Last Epoch. There are a lot of high damage telegraphed abilities that will easily kill you if you take the time to scratch your forehead or something, especially if you do not set up your build properly. That's why when I first saw Song of the Last Chantry, a node that was introduced a while back that allows you to channel Wandering Spirits to create a lot more spirits much quicker without that pesky cooldown. This was to allow Wandering Spirits to become a good skill again, at least standalone, after the recent nerfs, which reduced Wandering Spirits' poison damage by 99%. Yes, that is the actual number of how much it was reduced. One of, if not the biggest drawback of Song of the Last Chantry was after the channeled ability ended, all the spirits that were summoned were deleted because that's how Wandering Spirits normally functions without the channeling node. This led to this concept to just not function at all because every time we needed to move, which was all the time, we would lose all of our spirits we summoned instantly. Thankfully, it was changed a while back this patch so that when we stop channeling, it lets the spirits survive for their full duration after you summon them, which is about 4 seconds to 6 seconds depending how much investment you have. This has led me to try the archetype in solo mode, and I was pleasantly surprised to manage a 2-minute T4 Jurla kill while also comfortably doing 350 plus corruption monoliths. And I'm not even a lich. I'm a necromancer. Big surprise. Hello, this is Dread from Epic Builds, and in today's video topic, we are going to go over my finished setup for the Wandering Spirits Necrotic Spell Damage over Time Dread Shade Necromancer, a build that finally makes channeling look good while also dealing with most of the endgame. If you end up enjoying this video or playing this build, make sure to leave a like on the video, as that's the best way to support the channel and make it so that I keep making Last Epoch videos like this. So, to explain the build in detail, Wandering Spirits will summon a bunch of spirits. When you use this skill, it will instantly summon 4 of them, then summon more as you channel it with the song setup. In Monoliths, we can actually afford to tap the button and just spam summon spirits as we walk through the monoliths. Now, each spirit will apply a damage over time on enemies as they float over them. This dot can also stack when multiple spirits are on top of the enemy, meaning that we can scale our damage by just grabbing all the extra spirit size stuff at the top of the tree with Daunting Presence. This is by far the best node inside Wandering Spirits for this setup, as it enhances our clear and our single target at the same time. I was playing without this node, and oh my goodness, when I put 5 out of 5 in this node, the build actually started functioning and feeling great. Now, this damage scales off of spell damage, damage over time, and necrotic damage, meaning that we have a lot of options to scale our damage. That is why we end up going Necromancer with this version. Necromancer has 3 great reasons to be utilized here, even though it's the minion class. First of all is Dreadshade. Dreadshade is a buff that we apply to our minions, so that we will give them a bunch of necrotic flat damage, percentage necrotic damage, and a bunch of other stats that we can enable in its skill tree. We also use Symbiotic Apparition and Enemy of My Enemies to apply Dreadshade to our enemies, kind of like a curse, and we have it affect us in the process. That means all the juicy damage becomes our damage. We also gain an insane amount of armor thanks to Martyrdom, as we are stacking a lot of free vitality thanks to being an acolyte. This, on top of the armor while channeling, right, and of course the buff effect from Flesh Harvest, which works off of the enemy's HP instead of our minions, by the way, when we apply it to an enemy, means that we end up with a bunch of free damage in armor while we're channeling, meaning that we can actually tank a hit or two. The second reason we are a necromancer is because of all the free percentage damage we get with the interaction between Hollow Lich and River of Bones. This essentially gives us 200% increased global damage for just a few points, meaning that we won't need as much on gear. Now, we are turning off our leech, but this build is still staying topped off. How is that even possible, Dread? You might ask. And that's because, Mr. Strawman, the third reason we are a necromancer, Aura of Decay. Aura of Decay is by far one of the best utility skills in the game, mainly because of absence of life. When we have Aura of Decay on, it will heal us for 8% of our missing HP per second, which scales with healing effect. We currently have 380% healing effect in game, which I will be rounding to about 400% for this demonstration. This means we're healing 40% of our missing HP per second, meaning as we take more damage, we heal more back. This is essentially all of our sustain, and is the main reason we can get away without using Leech. Now, the reason why we're Necromancer for this, because this is a Lich skill, right, is because Necromancer has a lot of health on its tree. It gets 24% increased health from its tree alone, on top of the 8 points of vitality. That, combined with all of the other flat HP that Acolyte gets, is enough to scale Aura of Decay into a point where we can take a one-shot or two, and it feels great. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is Drain Life. Drain Life has a bit of a history. It's normally a channeled spell, which does a large amount of necrotic damage over time. Back in the day, used to grab Dark Shackles, which we turned into a ground AoE that you cast, and combined it with Blood Pact, which would have made it cost 0 mana, so you could just spam it. Now, that version was nerfed, and a huge mana cost was introduced to Dark Shackles. That makes this skill very bad in most situations, but we have an ace in our pocket. Wandering Spirits has a node that allows us to have a 15% chance to gain 12 mana whenever a spirit expires, meaning as we are channeling Wandering Spirits, we are gaining a very large amount of mana. This means we can use Drain Life liberally, dumping our entire mana bar and having it back within a few seconds of channeling Wandering Spirits. Sadly, this mana sustain is very RNG based and kind of unreliable at times, but it's more than enough to give us a single target boost we need to make this build function. Now, with all that being said, let's go in game so I can explain our skill specializations and gearing choices. If you made it this far in the video, please consider subscribing to the channel, as I make build guides like this all the time, and I also make a bunch of other related ARPG content. Now let's get in game, shall we? Alright, here we are in game with the build. So we are a level 97 Necromancer in solo mode, meaning that I took this build from level 1 all the way to 97 with no gear other than what I farmed, meaning that this build is actually really strong on a fresh start, which is hilarious as I didn't even expect this build to be good in the first place. Now, the first thing I like to talk about is the skill rotation. So essentially when we're doing Monoliths, we just kind of like hold down Wandering Spirits and we can target it, right? We target over here, target over there, right? And we can kind of like set up traps ahead of time in front of us. So when we're in a Monolith, we like to like set up the Wandering Spirits ahead of us so that they're set up and ready to go by the time we start walking through them, and it makes clear feel much better. Now, one of the biggest problems with this build is the fact that these spirits, they are wandering, of course, randomly. They don't go towards enemies, but when they overlap on a target, as you can tell here, our damage spikes significantly, right? Now, most of the time, most bosses in Last Epoch have larger hitboxes than the dummy. So I'm going to do my skill rotation for single target. So we apply Dread Shade, and then we apply it again. The reason why we do this is that we can apply Bane of Death. Now, the problem is the dummy does not count as an enemy, so pretend it's marked for death, right? Just pretend that. Now, we're going to apply that, and then do like a Drain Life, and then channel our Wandering Spirits. As you can tell, our damage starts ramping up significantly as we do this. Now, one of the biggest problems here is we're missing actually a significant portion of our damage because we're not marking for death the enemy, because we have no shred, so mark for death will reduce the enemy's resistances by 25%, right? And we can also stack multiple Drain Lives on the target, and of course, as well, how much mana that we get is very RNG based, so sometimes we have like 4 Drain Lives on the enemy, and sometimes we have 2. And also as well, our Wandering Spirits, also we might have 2 Wandering Spirits on the enemy. Sometimes we might have 4 Wandering Spirits on the enemy, right? So that makes Wandering Spirits, like this build, very RNG based. So we kind of have to just hold it out and keep doing damage. In the video, I'm doing T4 Jurla, and my guess overall that my actual single target on average is around 200 to 300k on the dummy, but like I said, that's dependent on a lot of different factors. And also as well, our damage goes up through the roof as we kill the enemy because we get a bunch of buff effect thanks to Flesh Harvest, which will apply to the enemy, which is great. So overall, damage is pretty good for a build like this, especially for a Necromancer, right? That's like trying to be a caster. It's great. Now, for the skills themselves, we take 3 points travel into Souls of Rage. This damage is great. The movement speed, I don't like it because it makes the souls wander more and means that they overlap less, but it's required to grab the next point, travel, medium, then the next point, Sheltering Spirits. We grab 2 points in Diffusing Souls. This is so that when I spam Drain Life on a target, I can channel Wandering Spirits, and as you can tell, our mana, it will start to recoup. There you go. And it goes up very quickly. And that means that we can swap between channeling Wandering Spirits and, of course, spamming Drain Lives, which is great because it gives us a lot of damage. So this node, 2 points, very good. Then 1 point in the Song of the Last Chantry. Now, the way this works is normally Wandering Spirits is like a 10-second cooldown. But thankfully, thanks to Song of the Last Chantry, we can kind of spam it, right? And we can hold it down. We get more reveal duration, meaning that we get more Wandering Spirits. I believe that there's no functional limit to the amount of Wandering Spirits there are on the screen. So this actually ends up, I think, oh, no, never mind. It's 13 and 17. So it's 17 Wandering Spirits in total, eventually. We just get to the max much quicker, right? So that's great. This is great. Like, this is great. Also doesn't suck mana as we channel it. It just has like an upfront channeling cost, which of course is very beneficial when we're spamming Drain Lives. Now, we take 2 points travel into into Eternal Haunt. This is kind of useless for us, doesn't really matter. Then 5 points into Daunting Presence. This makes it so that our spirits, as you can tell, are much bigger than normal. Before, they'd be small, little puny things, but with this build, we want our spirits to be bigger because as they walk over stuff, they do damage over time. And as you can tell, when you overlap multiple spirits on the enemy, you get like more damage. So we get like, I think like 7 to like K DPS per Wandering Spirits without any like investment or anything like that. Now, obviously, like I said, that's very variable depending on a lot of stuff with the build. Now, then we take 1 point travel into Thin Veil. We don't really care about this reveal rate because we already have all of this reveal rate over here. Then we grab Locus Mortis, which makes it so that instead of channeling it around us like it normally would, it'll, summon stuff around us, right? We can actually channel it at a distance, which makes it so that when we're doing Monoliths, we can channel it in front of us, get more spirits in front of us so that we can clear Monoliths with ease as we're not, having to channel it on us and then wait for the channel, then wait for them to kill. We can do this, bam, walk, bam, and it's great. So having it targeted is great. Also makes it so that we can always kind of zero it in on a boss because it'll reveal around your cursor. So to get the most overlaps possible, you definitely want to be putting your cursor over the boss. Now, that's pretty much it for Wandering Spirits. Now, for Drain Life, this is your stereotypical damage Drain Life setup. There's not really much to talk about. This has been known for a very long time. Now, AOD, the main thing that matters is just absence of life. That's all we care about. We also care about respite, which gives us poison res, and this on top of the reduced poison damage taken from Aura of Decay at a base, and this node right here, it makes it so that we actually are very tanky versus damage over time poison. And all of this combined makes it so that we don't really care about poison much. Poison doesn't do much damage to us. So if you're tired of poison damage killing you, this is the build for you. Now, of course, Transplant, very stereotypical setup. The most important part is Violent Emergence for the 20% cull. This makes up for the fact that our single target is a little lackluster, which is great. And of course, Dreadshade. This has a lot to talk about. So we take 1 point travel into Spectral Presence, 2 points travel into Dying Coven. The cast speed will apply to us, but we don't really care. Then, because none of our stuff is affected by cast speed other than the animation. But as you can tell, her arm raises up fast enough. We don't have to worry about that. Then we take 4 points into Grim Fate. This is a generic more damage multiplier. This also increases the area of the Dreadshade so that it's easier to stand in, because we need to stand in this area to get the more damage, which is great, right? Then, of course, 1 point into Symbiotic Apparition. You and your allies are affected. This is very important. Makes it so that the build functions. Then 1 point into Enemy of My Enemies, which allows us to actually apply Dreadshade to the enemy, kind of like a curse, because we don't want to be summoning a minion and applying it to that, and then standing on top of the minion and hoping that the minion doesn't die. We'd rather just apply it to an enemy and then channel on them and do damage, which is much more preferable. Then 3 points into Bane of Death, which makes it so that when we cast or expire, you can see Mark for Death here. It doesn't apply to the dummy. Mark for Death is important because we get a bunch of more damage thanks to Reap of the Damned. So we want the Mark for Death, right? Now we take 4 points into Lingering Doom for the flat necrotic damage. We want as much flat necrotic as possible. You get 10 here and then 12 here. We are running a staff because we want as much flat necrotic damage as possible. So getting all this flat damage is great. Then 1 point travel into Wisdom of the Dead, 1 point into Martyrdom. This gives us 25 flat armor per vitality. We have like 50 vitality. Right now we're at 26% armor. Bam, 59% with just Dreadshade allocated. Makes us feel way tankier. Then of course 3 points into Flesh Harvest, as this scales with the enemy health instead, because we have Enemy of My Enemies, which means that as their HP goes down, we get more buff effect, up to 100% more buff effect, meaning we get 50 armor per vitality, we get 120% more damage from this, we get 100% increased damage from the base, and we get like 44 flat damage. So all of that combined is really strong. That's pretty much it for the skills. Now for the passives, TLDR, vitality scaling. We want this damn chance so we get the more damage against damned enemies. Hollow Lich plus River of Bones is very important, as that gives us a bunch of increased damage. Grab as much flat HP as possible, same with Tyrant. And that's pretty much it for the skill tree. If you want this skill tree, the planner will be in the description for more detail. Now, for gearing, this is very interesting. So for idols, I went for healing effectiveness idols. Mainly, we just want as much healing effectiveness as possible. I think you can get HP on the suffixes, but good luck getting those. Now, eventually, once I get my reses fixed, right, and it's not like terrible resistance, I would eventually like a Throne of Ambition, because as you can tell, we could probably very easily reach armor cap if we have Throne of Ambition, by the way, which is absolutely fucking nuts, right? So yeah, Throne of Ambition would be great. I just didn't feel like farming it, because as you can tell, we got plenty of armor as it is. I don't need Throne of Ambition like other builds, right? Now, I'm running an LP Atrophy with HP on it. Obviously, Atrophy is really good because that 24% pen works for our Wandering Spirits damage, and that on top of the Mark for Death, meaning that we actually shred/pen 50% damage. Now, we could get Necrotic Shred. The problem with Necrotic Shred is it shares the Blessing Splat with armor while channeling, which of course is the main reason to play this as a channeling skill, so we get the armor while channeling. So that is a non-option. So we just want as much pen as possible, right? Then for the boots, I went with the Terrace Path with movement speed. And essentially, I just went with whatever gave me movement speed, like double movement speed. This is almost all of our movement speed. So having this is great. Giving us 60% movement speed, actually amazing. You don't need this. You could use whatever pair of boots you wanted. I like LP boots with movement speed on them. And of course, to get as much HP as possible, right? Now, I have a Twisted Heart of Ulcrios. I did a lot of Reign of Dragon farming here. I did a little too much Reign of Dragon farming in SSF. I did 183 Echoes in SSF, got to 350 Corruption, which is really annoying, right? Like significantly annoying. I was trying to go for an LP Titan Heart. I mean Twisted Heart. This is the only one I got. I would have loved an LP one because I had plenty of. I have a really good relic. Relic here. I could have used this on the Dragonheart and been great, right? Problem is, of course, I never dropped one, but I would eventually try to get an LP Twisted Heart, and of course, try to get that implicit as high as possible. Now for a helmet, HP, Vitality, and of course you can do like level of Spirit Plague or whatever for increased spell damage. We want as much increased damage as possible because our damage is really lackluster with this build, so we want as much damage everywhere we can get it. Our amulet, I got really lucky with this. We just want the necrotic, the healing effect, HP, and res. Of course, perfect. Staff. Eventually, you just want a staff with as much increased damage as possible. You want it with as much flat as possible. This temple staff is great, but you can use whatever staff as long as it isn't a gate staff. I tried to use a gate staff multiple times, but it didn't end up being good. It felt terrible. So any staff with a bunch of increased damage, increased damage over time, increased necrotic damage. Damage while channeling does function, but there's no reason to run it versus like increased necrotic or spell damage or damage over time. So I'd ignore damage while channeling because we're not always channeling, right? Like we channel for a second, then we move on, and that wouldn't apply to our spirits while we're running around, right? And of course, for suffixes, it legitimately doesn't matter. Could be HP on hit, could be chill on hit, could be slow on hit. Slow on hit would be great because it would chill and slow on hit would be great because it would make it so enemies trying to attack you would be much slower, which would be insane, right? I just never got one because I got really unlucky with staffs on this character. Then for the chest, this is one of the best chests I've ever made ever. I sealed T1 necrotic damage, and of course I went for as much vitality as possible because remember, this scales our HP while also scaling our flat armor we're getting. And of course, +2 to Wandering Spirits is great. Wandering Spirits is a point heavy bastard because you want as many points in Reap of the Damned, Poisoned Minds, Souls of Rage. This build scales heavily off of levels. So getting a +4 Wandering Spirits would be amazing, right? And of course, eventually you get it on a Titan Heart, right? To get the 15% less damage while we're wielding a two-handed weapon, which would be great. I had a Titan Heart with +1, but sadly it's not good enough in comparison to this chest. Rings, damage, healing effect, crit avoid, usual, same thing with this one. Damage, healing effect, res, usual. Belt, cleanse, hopefully necrotic damage. I got unlucky with that freezing concoction roll. And of course, HP. Then of course, everything else doesn't really matter. Now, one thing. Eventually, thanks to the fact that these are very low in potential, right? They're level 6. You could essentially get 2-3 LP Tongues of the Aberrant Seer. Now, Dread, why are we running this? Well, not only does it give us $3 attributes, which is great because we're scaling vitality, it also, of course, gives +1 to poison spells. If you did not know, whenever we grab Spectral Putrescence, right, this counts as a poison spell. This is very important to the build because it allows us to get thrown stacks, allows us to apply chill and slow to enemies, right? And of course, it also allows us to apply damned on enemies thanks to Eye of Damnation with that damn chance so that we get the more damage from Reap of the Damned while clearing. So this counts as a poison spell if you did not know, which means that we can put this on and get extra point, which means we get 2 extra points for free. So that is very late endgame. I would heavily suggest farming Age of Winter until your eyes fall out for those 3 LP aberrant seers. I wouldn't go anything under 3 LP. And eventually, if you have enough healing effect, you have enough res and all that, you can run an Omnis. I dropped an Omnis on this character because I was farming a lot. Problem is, this is one of the worst Omnises I've ever gotten. Otherwise, I would have used it and +1 to skills. Plus level to skills is one of the most important things with this build because we get more damage here, more damage here, more damage here, more damage here. So, and of course, more damage here and less reveal range, which means less reveal range means they're tighter, which means they shotgun more, which is great. So, plus the levels is very, very important. So, I would heavily suggest trying to get as much plus the levels as humanly possible. Now, with all that being said, this has been Dread from Epic Builds. Feel free to ask questions down below. Bye!